I didn't know my baby was dying. I was 40 minutes away, sipping a $400 glass of Burgundy, laughing at someone's joke about the Hamptons, and my 6-month-old son was fighting for his life. My name is Scarlett Hargrove. 3 years ago, that name meant something in Houston. Not Hargrove, that's my married name. I mean Scarlett Voss. My name meant 5-star restaurants with power brokers, front row seats at charity galas, and my face on the cover of Houston Style magazine under the headline, "The New Guard of Texas Philanthropy." Now all people will remember is a hospital waiting room, my blouse still stained from the wine I'd spilled when they called, and a father-in-law standing in front of a wall of doctors, pointing at me like I was something he'd scraped off his Italian loafers. Let me take you back, because none of this started that night. And you need to understand how a woman with everything, the River Oaks house, the charity board seats, the husband who looked like a senator from Central Casting, ends up watching the most powerful man in her life try to destroy her in a hospital hallway while her baby lies in the ICU. The thing about being married into the Hargrove family is that you never actually marry the man, you marry the dynasty, and dynasties don't let go. My husband, Reed Hargrove, was the third generation of Houston oil money, not just oil refineries, pipeline contracts, real estate, and a private equity arm that had quietly swallowed half the commercial blocks along Buffalo Bayou. His father, Prescott Hargrove, was the kind of man who shook hands with governors and made people feel like they owed him a favor just for being in the room. 72 years old, silver hair, custom Brioni suits, and eyes the color of cold concrete. He smiled constantly. I never trusted it once. When Reed brought me home to meet his parents at their River Oaks compound with the wrought iron gate and the live oak trees older than the Civil War, Prescott had looked at me the way you look at a painting someone tells you is valuable, but you suspect is a forgery. I was 28, a corporate events coordinator from Austin with a trust fund-sized student debt, and a mother who waitressed at a Tex-Mex place off I-35. I wasn't Hargrove material. Everyone in that family knew it. They just never said it out loud. Instead, they smiled and handed me a glass of champagne and said things like, "We're so glad Reed has someone who keeps him grounded," like I was an anchor, not a Wi-Fi. Should have read the room. But when you're 28 and in love, and the man is beautiful and kind, when it's just the two of you, you convince yourself the rest is just family quirks. You tell yourself every family has rough edges. You don't ask why those edges only ever seem to cut you. Reed and I married in a ceremony at the Hotel Grand Duke. 300 guests. Vera Wang dress. The flowers alone cost more than my mother's car. It was the most expensive day of my life, and somehow I still felt like a guest at someone else's party. Prescott's wife, Gloria Aline, steel-spined woman who wore her gray hair in a chignon, and her feelings behind a mask of perfect Southern manners, had planned most of it. She'd never once asked what I wanted. She'd present Reed with choices, and Reed would look at me and say, "Whatever you think, babe," and then look back at his mother. I should have clocked that dynamic on day one. Our first 2 years were good, or, at least I told myself they were. We had Ellie, my daughter, from a brief relationship before Red, a fact that Prescott had made his peace with only because Ellie was well-behaved and blonde and looked enough like a Hargrove that he could pretend she wasn't a complication. Ellie was 6 when I married Reed, smart as a whip, curious, with her father's dark eyes and my stubbornness. She called Reed Dad after about 3 months of marriage, and I remember that being one of the only moments I felt genuinely certain I'd done the right thing. Then came baby Colton, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage turned out to be a story I'd been telling myself in the dark. Colton was born in March of the following year, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with Reed's jaw and my auburn hair, and this way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the universe. I was obsessed with that boy. Every mother says that, I know, but when you've built a life on unstable ground, a marriage where the power was always slightly off balance, a household where decisions got made above your head, that baby becomes the thing you hold on to. He was purely mine. He loved me without condition or politics or expectation. By the time Colton was 4 months old, The cracks in my marriage had started to show in ways I could no longer ignore. Reed was working later, then not coming home some nights at all. Business dinners, he said. Investor calls. You know how Q4 gets, Scarlett, and I did know. I'd spent enough years married into this world to know the calendar, the rhythms, the excuses. But Q4 had always been just that, busy. Not absent, not the kind of absence that smells like unfamiliar perfume. When he finally does walk through the door at 2 a.m., I didn't confront him, not yet, because I made the worst mistake a smart woman can make. I started gathering evidence first, and while I was busy building my case, someone else was building one against me. It started subtly, the way the worst things always do. A comment from Prescott at Sunday dinner. You seem tired, Scarlett. You're not overdoing it, are you? Said with concern, dripping with implication. Then Gloria mentioning to Reed that I'd seemed scattered at Colton's pediatrician appointment. I hadn't been scattered. I'd been exhausted. I had a 4-month-old and a husband who was essentially a ghost. And I was still showing up to every board meeting, every school pickup for Ellie, every Sunday dinner at the compound. But once the word scattered enters a Hargrove conversation, it takes on a life of its own. I noticed Prescott started showing up more, dropping by the house unannounced, always with a reason. A gift for Colton, papers for Reed to sign, a wine bottle from some vineyard he wanted Reed's opinion on. And he was always watching me, not in the way people watch you when they care about you, in the way people watch you when they're cataloging your behavior. I'd catch him looking at me when I poured myself a glass of wine with dinner. I'd see him notice when I was short with the housekeeper, or when I looked tired, or when I was on my phone during a conversation. I thought I was paranoid. I thought I was sleep-deprived and postpartum, and reading darkness into ordinary moments. God, I wish I had been. 3 weeks before everything collapsed, I found the first piece of what I was looking for. I wasn't even snooping. I genuinely went into Reed's study to find Colton's birth certificate for an insurance form, and I found a text thread on the iPad he'd left unlocked on his desk. The name in the thread was K, short, anonymous, careful. But the messages were not. 6 months of them. I stood in that study in my socks on the cold hardwood floor, and I read every single one, and when I was done I sat down on the leather chair that had belonged to his grandfather, and I stared at the ceiling until my breathing evened out. Her name was Kendall. I'd find that out later. She worked in Reed's private equity office. She was 26 and had no idea, apparently, that I existed in any meaningful way. Or maybe she did and simply didn't care. The texts weren't just romantic. They were intimate in the way that tells you this has been going on long enough for someone to know how you take your coffee and what makes you laugh at 2 a.m. They were a relationship, a real one, running parallel to mine like a shadow version of my own life. I put the iPad back exactly where I found it. I walked out of the study. I smiled at the housekeeper. I fed Colton. I put Ellie to bed. And I did not say a single word because I had just decided that leaving Reed Hargrove was not something I was going to do quietly, and I needed time to build my exit with the same care they'd always used to manage me. But I never got that time, because 17 days later, on a Thursday evening in late October, Reed told me his parents wanted to watch the kids so we could have a date night. Just the two of us, he said. Mom's been asking to spend more time with Colton anyway, and Ellie loves it out there. I remember thinking this was unusual. Prescott and Gloria rarely watched both kids. Usually they wanted Colton, the Hargrove heir, as Prescott liked to say with a wink that never quite reached his eyes, and Ellie was accommodated more than welcomed. But Reed was looking at me with something I hadn't seen in months. Attention, real attention, and I was stupid enough to be moved by it. I got dressed up. I wore the navy Roland Morate dress I'd bought for a gala we'd never ended up attending, and my grandmother's pearl earrings, and I felt, briefly, like myself, like the woman I'd been before this marriage started hollowing me out. We drove to Brennan's on Smith Street, and Reed was warm and present and funny in the way he used to be. and I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it never did. We talked about Ellie's school play. We talked about Christmas plans. He ordered the bread pudding because he remembered it was my favorite. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is fixable. Maybe my phone rang at 9:47. It was Gloria. And even before I answered it, I knew, some part of me, the part that had been watching and cataloging and surviving for 3 years, already knew. Scarlett, we need you at Memorial Herman. Colton, he stopped breathing. They have him stable, but they need you here. Her voice was iron, controlled. She did not cry. In retrospect, she never cried. Reed went white across the table from me, and I was already standing, already grabbing my bag, already moving through the restaurant in that horrible, tunnel vision way. You move when your child is in danger, and your body operates separately from your mind. We made it to the hospital in 18 minutes. Reed drove. I don't remember the drive. I remember the automatic doors, the cold antiseptic smell, the nurse at the pediatric emergency desk who looked up when I said Colton Hargrove and immediately got on the radio. And then Prescott, standing in the hallway in his charcoal suit like he'd been waiting for us, standing with 2 doctors and Gloria, and this composed, devastated look on his face that I now understand was performance. He waited until the doctors were looking at me, until there were witnesses, and then he said it, clear and steady, the way you say something you've rehearsed. She's a drug addict. I know that sounds cruel, but you need to know, I've been watching this for months. This was bound to happen. And the doctors looked at me, the nurse looked at me. Reed, my own husband, standing 6 inches to my left, said nothing, just looked at the floor, and the world tilted so hard I put my hand on the wall. I had never, not once, had a substance problem, but I was standing in a hospital hallway with a 6-month-old in the ice, and the most powerful man in the room had just said otherwise, and every person in that hallway believed him before I could open my mouth. They separated me from the group. I was brought into a side room, and a social worker came in, and I sat there with my hands in my lap and the marble-cold realization that this was not an accident. This was not panic or grief or a father-in-law losing his mind under pressure. This was coordinated. This was the move. I'd been building my case against Reed, and in the meantime, Prescott Hargrove had been building his case against me, and he'd chosen tonight, chosen this crisis, chosen the worst possible moment of my motherhood to make his play. The social worker was gentle. She asked questions. I answered everything. I volunteered to be tested immediately, right now, whatever you need, a blood draw, a urine screen. I don't care. Do all of it. She wrote something down, and then the door opened, and it was Ellie, my 8-year-old daughter, still in her pajamas, her hair down, her eyes wide and scared and searching for me. They'd apparently brought her from the house in the chaos. She'd been in the waiting room with a nurse, and she'd gotten away from them. And she'd found the room, and she ran to me and buried her face in my shoulder, and I held her like she was the only real thing left in the world. The doctors were still in the doorway. Prescott was behind them, and Ellie, with her face still pressed against my collarbone, pulled back and looked at her grandfather, and she said, in that clear, unafraid way that children say things when they don't yet know enough to be tactical, "Grandpa, why did you put medicine in the baby's bottle? You said it would make the baby sleep forever." The hallway went dead silent, and Prescott Hargrove, who had never in his life been caught without a response, looked at my 8-year-old daughter and said absolutely nothing at all. Ellie didn't know what she'd done. She was 8. She just told the truth the way children do, like a hand grenade rolled gently across a marble floor, and when it went off, it took everything with it. The silence in that hallway lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt like for years. I watched Prescott's face go through something I'd never seen on it before. Not guilt, not fear, something colder than either. Calculation. He was deciding, in real time, how to reframe what a child had just said in front of 2 doctors, a social worker, a nurse, and his own son. Reed was staring at Ellie like he'd never seen her before. Gloria had gone perfectly still, which I would later understand meant she'd known. She'd known something, at least. How much, I didn't learn until later. The lead physician, a compact, efficient woman named Dr. Okonkwo, who I will be grateful to for the rest of my life, stepped forward first. She looked at Ellie calmly and said, "Sweetheart, can you tell me more about what you saw Grandpa do?" And Ellie, my incredible, terrifying, precise little girl, described it. She'd been sitting in the kitchen at the compound earlier that evening. Prescott had been fixing Colton's bottle. She'd watched him take something from his jacket pocket, a small bottle, and add drops to the formula. She'd asked what it was. He'd said it was special medicine that would help the baby sleep for a very, very long time. She'd asked if that was okay. He'd said, "It's a secret between us, Ellie Bug," and she'd gone back to her coloring book because she was 8. And she trusted her grandfather. And she didn't know yet that adults lie. In the time it takes to cross a hospital hallway. The entire axis of that night shifted. I went from suspect to witness, and Prescott Hargrove went from patriarch to predator. Dr. Okonkwo asked everyone except Ellie and me to step back. She got on her radio. Within 6 minutes, there were 2 hospital security officers in the hallway, and someone was calling the police. Prescott tried to speak twice. The first time, Dr. Okonkwo held up one hand without looking at him and kept talking into her radio. The second time, Gloria put her hand on his arm and said, very quietly, "Don't," and he didn't. That was the moment I understood that Gloria was not ignorant. Gloria was complicit. And Gloria, unlike her husband, knew when to stop digging. Reed looked at me. I'd been with this man for 3 years. I'd shared a bed with him and a mortgage and a child and 1,000 Sunday dinners at his parents' table. And in that moment, looking at his face, I could not find a single thing I recognized. He looked like a man watching a building collapse that he'd paid to have built. Not grief, not outrage, calculation. The same look as his father. It ran in the blood. My husband had known. Not all of it, but enough. And that was the thing that would take me the longest to survive. Not what Prescott did, but what Reed chose not to see. Colton had been given chloral hydrate, a sedative, old, largely discontinued, but not impossible to obtain if you know the right people. And Prescott Hargrove knew the right people for everything. The dose was calibrated. Dr. Okonkwo would tell me this later, in the careful language of someone who is trying not to terrify a mother any more than the situation already demands to incapacitate, not kill. He was meant to be unconscious long enough to be alarming, but not long enough to cause permanent damage. In the opinion of whoever administered this, she paused. That's a very specific line to walk. It suggests someone who researched the dosage. Someone who researched the dosage. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Prescott hadn't been trying to kill my son. He'd been trying to create a crisis, a medical emergency that would happen on my watch. Except it wasn't supposed to happen on my watch, was it? It was supposed to happen when I'd been away for hours, when I'd been seen drinking wine at a restaurant, when Reed had a rock-solid alibi, and the story was already written before the ambulance arrived. Scarlett Hargrove, troubled, scattered, possibly using Scarlett Hargrove, the woman Prescott had been carefully, methodically, publicly concerned about for months. Scarlett Hargrove, unfit mother. He hadn't wanted Colton dead. He'd wanted me gone. And the custody agreement that would have followed, sole paternal custody, granted on emergency grounds to the Hargrove family, the kind of thing a team of $800 an hour attorneys can move through a Texas family court in 90 days, would have been the cleanest solution. No messy divorce, no discovery process, no Scarlett walking away with half of what this family had spent 3 generations accumulating. The Houston Police Department sent 2 detectives that night. By morning, they had Prescott's phone records, his financial records, and a pharmacy contact in the Montrose area who would eventually confirm that a man matching Prescott's description had inquired about chloral hydrate in the months prior. Prescott's attorney arrived at the hospital at 2 a.m. and said nothing that helped. Prescott was not arrested that night. He was escorted from the hospital and told not to leave the state. It would be another 11 days before the arrest warrant came through. And in those 11 days I moved through the world like I was made of something that could shatter. Colton recovered fully. 3 days in the ICU, then a regular pediatric room, then home. He has no lasting effects. He is, right now, the most purely joyful human being I have ever known. And he will never know what happened to him in the first 6 months of his life, because I will spend every day of my existence making sure his world is too full of good things to leave room for that story. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before the story ended, I had to survive the middle. And the middle was where I did my own kind of damage. I did not cry in that hospital. Not once. Not in the hallways. Not in the waiting room. Not in the room where they let me finally hold Colton on day 2 when he'd been moved out of the ICU, and his little hands were curling around my finger like he was trying to anchor me. I felt something, but it was not grief. It was clarity. The specific, cold, crystalline clarity that comes when you've been outmaneuvered and you finally understand the full shape of the game that was being played against you, and you start playing it back. My first call was not to my mother, or to a girlfriend, or to a therapist. It was to a woman named Rowena Castillo. She was a family attorney in Houston who had a reputation for taking on high-asset divorce cases, where the power imbalance was severe enough that other firms wouldn't touch them. I'd found her name 3 weeks earlier, when I was still quietly building my case about Reed's affair, and I'd put her number in my phone under Ellie's pediatrician backup because I had already stopped trusting who might look at my phone. I called her from the hospital bathroom at 6 a.m. while Colton slept and Red sat in a chair 20 feet away, pretending to read something on his phone. Rowena answered on the second ring. I told her everything in 11 minutes. She said, "Don't speak to your husband or his family without me present. Don't move out of the house. Don't sign anything. And absolutely do not let them near the children." I said, "Understood." She said, "I'll be there by noon." She was there by 10-30. The thing that nobody tells you about surviving a powerful family's attempt to destroy you is that the evidence is only half the battle. The other half is the story, and whoever controls the story controls the outcome. Prescott had been controlling the story about me for months. The scattered comments to doctors, the quiet word to the right people at the right charity boards, the way he'd positioned himself in that hospital hallway with witnesses, with authority, with the absolute confidence of a man who believes he has already won. He'd built a narrative, and I was about to burn it down with a narrative of my own. Rowena was extraordinary, small woman, early 50s, with reading glasses she pushed up into her dark hair, and a way of sitting absolutely still in a room that made everyone else seem like they were fidgeting. She filed for emergency protective custody of both children within 48 hours. Citing the documented criminal investigation and Reed's failure to act when Ellie disclosed what she had witnessed, she attached Ellie's recorded statement. The hospital had documented it properly. Thank God, and the preliminary toxicology on Colton. The Hargrove family attorney, a man named Bradford Elks, who wore pocket squares and had never once in his career faced an opponent who actually had the receipts, had no response to the toxicology report. You can spin a lot of things in Texas family court. You cannot spin chloral hydrate in a 6-month-old's bloodstream. Reed called me on the 4th day, not from the house he'd apparently been staying somewhere else, which told me everything about where his loyalties had landed when the pressure came. He said, "I didn't know, Scarlett. I need you to know that." I said, "I believe that you didn't know all of it." Long pause. He said, I said, "But you knew enough to look the other way." Reed, and that's the thing I can't come back from. He didn't fight me on the children. I think, somewhere beneath the Hargrove programming, Reed Hargrove was a man who understood what his father had done and was too ashamed to compound it. He gave me primary custody. He gave me the house. He gave me what Rowena's financial forensics team had identified as a settlement figure that reflected both the length of the marriage and the documented attempt to remove me from it through manufactured grounds. Bradford Elks looked like a man who'd aged a decade in a conference room over the course of those negotiations. I looked at the final number and I thought, that's what Prescott thought I was worth. Less than this. He was wrong. Prescott Hargrove was charged with felony child endangerment and criminal administration of a controlled substance to a minor. His attorney tried 3 different strategies before trial: that the substance was not his, that he hadn't understood the dose, that Ellie's account was the misinterpretation of an 8-year-old child. None of it landed. Ellie's testimony given in a protected hearing with the child advocate present, because I was not about to let my daughter be cross-examined by Bradford Elks in an open courtroom, was specific, consistent, and devastating. The pharmacy contact testified. The phone records were admitted. The financial trail to the compound pharmacy showed a cash withdrawal that matched the estimated cost of the quantity. Prescott Hargrove, 72 years old, River Oaks patriarch, oil dynasty heir and shaker of governor's hands, was convicted. He received for years. He'll likely serve too. I was not in the courtroom for the verdict. I was at Ellie's school play. She had the lead role. Gloria cooperated with the prosecution. Partially, what she knew exactly, and when she knew it, became a legal question I was not party to. What I know is that she knew something was wrong that night, that her composure in the hospital hallway was not the composure of a woman who was surprised. It was the composure of a woman who had made peace with what her husband was capable of and had decided that her job was damage control, not prevention. I will never forgive her. I also understand her, just barely. Just at the edges, a woman who had spent 50 years inside a dynasty that ground people down and called it strength. She'd been ground down to, just into a different shape than me. Reed and I finalized a divorce 9 months after that night. He remarried 14 months later. Not Kendall, someone else, someone from his world. I heard about it through the grapevine and felt nothing except a mild, passing sadness for whoever she was and what she was walking into. I hope she's smarter than I was. I hope she reads the room faster. I hope she knows that love and inheritance are not the same thing, and that sometimes what looks like a family is actually a corporation, and that corporations don't love you back. As for me, here's the part that nobody expects when they hear this story. Here's what actually happened to Scarlett Voss, who spent 3 years being called Scarlett Hargrove and slowly disappearing into a name that was never really hers. I moved. Not far. I kept Ellie in her school, in her life, near her friends, because her stability was not something I was willing to trade for my comfort. But we left River Oaks. I bought a house in Montrose, a real house with a yard and mismatched furniture and a kitchen that smells like something other than a catered event. I went back to work, not as an events coordinator. I'd outgrown that. Or maybe I'd always been meant for something else, and had just been too busy managing a life that was too big for me to notice. I went to work with Rowena Castillo-Pratt's firm, not as an attorney. I don't have the degree. As a client advocate, I work with women who are where I was, women whose husbands have more attorneys than they do, women whose in-laws have decided that the cleanest exit involves making her look unstable. I sit across from them, and I say, I know what this feels like. I know how it looks from inside. And then I hand them Rowena's number. Colton is 14 months old now. He says mama and dog, and a sound that might be Ellie's name, or might just be a very enthusiastic noise. He has no idea. He is spectacular. Ellie tells everyone at school that her brother is a survivor, which is both factually accurate and slightly alarming when she explains it to other 8-year-olds on the playground. But I have stopped trying to edit Ellie's honesty because the world needs more of it, not less. The last time I was at a charity gala, an event I went to with Rowena and 2 of our clients, for an organization that supports women in family court proceedings, someone recognized me from the Houston Style magazine cover. She came over and said, with that particular mix of sympathy and fascination that I've learned to receive gracefully, I heard what happened to you. I'm so sorry. How are you doing? And I thought about what that question actually meant. How am I doing? I'm doing like a woman who walked through the worst night of her life and came out the other side knowing exactly who she is and exactly what she's capable of. I'm doing like someone who finally understands that the thing they were afraid of losing, the life, the house, the status, the name, was never actually the thing they needed to protect. The things I needed to protect were 26 inches long and smelled like baby shampoo. and were 8 years old with a habit of saying exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right moment. I protected them. I lost everything else, and I protected them. And I would do it again, without hesitation. And I would do it better, and I would do it faster, because now I know the rules. I told the woman at the gala, "I'm doing great, you have no idea." And I meant every word. Because the thing Prescott Hargrove never understood, the thing men like him never understand, is that when you try to erase a woman by taking everything she has, you leave her with nothing to lose. And a woman with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in any room. He thought he was removing a problem. He built a case, planned a night, dropped something into a bottle, and smiled in a hallway, all to remove a woman who didn't fit the frame he'd built for his family's future. And what he actually did, in that clinical, calculated, monstrous way of his, was take a woman who had been shrinking herself for 3 years and give her a reason to stop. The last piece, I'll tell you. 6 months after the conviction, I received a letter, no return address. Inside was a single note card with a monogram I recognized, Gloria Hargrove's personal stationery, the kind she used for handwritten thank you notes after dinner parties. It said, in her precise, upright cursive, "I should have stopped him. I know that. I'm sorry I didn't. Protect those children." There was nothing else. No name, no attempt to reconcile or explain or ask for anything. I read it 3 times and then I put it in the file I keep for things that matter, but that I don't have to respond to. I don't know if it was courage or cowardice or just the last act of a woman who had been making the wrong choice for 50 years, and finally, once, made the right one. I suppose it doesn't have to be one or the other. Ellie asked me once, about 2 months after everything, whether Grandpa was a bad man or a sad man. I told her he was a man who had so much power for so long that he stopped understanding that other people were real. She thought about that for a while and then said, "That's sad and bad." I said, "Yeah, baby, it is." She went back to her homework. I poured myself a glass of wine, a $20 bottle from the grocery store, because I don't live that other life anymore. And I sat at my kitchen table in my house in Montrose with the mismatched chairs, and the dog Colton still can't say properly, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt like myself, like Scarlett Voss, like a woman who had survived something and was still standing, still sharp, still here, not despite what they tried to do to her, but because of it, because they came for me at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible way. And I was still standing in that hallway when Ellie said what she said. I was still in the room. They didn't get to write the ending. I did. Don't leave without commenting where you're watching from. My notice, every message. I'm thankful you shared this time with me, so please subscribe to stay connected. I'll return with another story shortly. Until then, stay grounded and keep believing.